Look around you. The systems are failing. The currency, the court, the Constitution. And no one is coming to save you. You feel it. You see it. But you've been told to ignore it. This isn't paranoia. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's collapse. Designed, accelerated, and now unavoidable. So what's your plan? What happens when the banks close? When the grid goes down? When they come knocking and you have nothing protected, nothing structured, nothing left? You don't need a bunker. You need a protocol. The collapse protocol is the plan for people who still think clearly, who want to live, thrive, and protect what's theirs, even in a world gone mad. You don't have time. You don't have backup. But now you have this. Collapse protocol from Twain Consulting before the end begins. Contact us as soon as you can. Facebook.com/Twain Consulting or call us at 213-465-0639. Good morning, or whatever time it happens to be when you get this. I say good morning, of course, for the people who are tuning in at 7 a.m. or thereabouts in California to listen to me, Politics by Jake. I am Jake, your political correspondent, your commentator, and a student historian. And what we do on this show, among other things, is political education. And the reason we do political education is because, number one, I know that you guys don't know this stuff. It's just like I don't know the plumbing or electricity in my house. I don't know the mechanics of my car as good as an auto mechanic. And there is a critical need. There is no greater need now than there ever has been, and probably a greater need now than there ever has been, to understand what's going on in the country and in the world. And that's what we try to do. We give you a bi-weekly. We're on Mondays and Fridays, 7 a.m. And you, of course, get the podcast on kcaa.com, kcaradio.com. And we try to give you an overview of what's going on, a strategic overview. And so let's get into it, shall we? We're now, of course, and I mentioned this the last couple of shows, we're going deeper and deeper into this aggravated world crisis of all the institutions, and we're observing some remarkable phenomena. A lot of it radiates out of the Trump administration here in the United States because of the position of the United States as the, up to now, leading modern state. You've heard me talk about the United States as the modern state par excellence. And unfortunately, as the old saying goes, whom the gods destroy, they first make mad. And we're dealing with the reverberations of the Trump insanity. And it is insanity. And indeed, mega fascism across the world. And we're seeing some singularities. We're seeing some events. We're seeing some developments which in normal times have not generally occurred. And which would be hard to imagine occurring without this total crisis. This is cultural, it's political, it's military, it's economic, it's really just about everything. It's even theological, I guess you can say, and you've heard me talk on the show about these facts before, but you have also heard me talk about the fact that when religion attempts to cross into politics, all of its doctrines become fair game, and it no longer has this unassailable status as something sacred or holy. It just becomes fair game. And so we here at Politics by Jake take that seriously, and we attack that, and we call it out because it is theological. So therefore, we have all the great systems. All the maximum systems are in crisis. This is quite a statement. I think you'll agree, but it's true. And in the middle of this, we're seeing these singularities of remarkable events. We've got the tariffs. We've got insane chaos being induced by the tariffs. I mean, this is this person who, he's not anything. I mean, what he knows is how to delude and dupe people. And he's done it all his life. He's destroyed the economic agreements that have existed globally, and he's trying to replace it with these tariffs because it's all about the grift for him, and he has the mentality of a cheap, penny-pinching, money-grubbing Queen's landlord. And unfortunately, he's got people who, for the sake of money and power, will go along with it. So in these tariffs, there's a possible breakdown crisis of the world economic system from the point of view of the supply chains, right? You know, the components coming in from so many different places, the worldwide network of production. This is what we're talking about when I talk about this chaos and this singularity and the great danger. We've got a crisis of Gestapo, ICE Gestapo. Tactics here in the United States, the assembly of what looks like a private army using government money, mass layoffs in the executive branch. This is another crisis. We've got Trump's appeasement, not just of Russia. We mentioned Russia, but of China as well. We've got the fact that TikTok propaganda machine, which is a Chinese surveillance apparatus, in my opinion, goes on, despite a law that says it has to be shut down or sold off. And now we've got Trump complicating it with his appeasement of China on the very critical question of the chip. The most modern chip, top-of-the-line NVIDIA semiconductor chips, now being sold once again to the enemy state, the People's Republic of China, the butchers of Beijing. So we've got all these things. And one of the things we have is the big bastard of a bill. I laugh, but it's not funny. And this is now law. And why do we have it? I'll tell you why we have it. Because we allowed a fascist cabal into the government. And there are fellow travelers in the government already in whose best interest, and I'm talking about money, and I'm talking about power, is to allow this to happen. The only other explanation is because they're stupid. Take your pick. Maybe they're fellow travelers and they're stupid. Perhaps also there are some who are morally compromised, according to the base that they rely on to get reelected, because we know more than anything, these people want to be reelected. They love their power. They love their entitlements. They love the insider information they get. That makes them rich. And we see this clearly in the cabinet. For example, we have uncovered, and I say this is regrettable and it's unfortunate, like Marco Rubio, little Marco, Pam Bondi, former AG of the state of Florida, that sewer of corruption. We have Carolyn Leavitt, the minister of propaganda, who has totally drunk the Kool-Aid, and the rest, political horse. They plainly are. The House and the Senate has saddled this country with an additional $6 trillion in debt in the name of savings. So, political horrors? Yes, I say so, and of the worst kind. You have the Supreme Court. Are they fools because they manipulate and transfigure the law to allow a malignant narcissist who is able to do nothing but to destroy USAID, to destroy the Department of Education? And why? Why all of this? It's to destroy the United States. Now, hear me out, all right? The United States is the dominant force par excellence. It is the dominating paradigm, along with the British Parliament and some other things, as I talked about on the show on Monday. It's the gateway to the modern world. It's the gateway to the new birth of freedom. And it's the modern force par excellence, which is directed against oligarchy and is also directed against the baneful influence of religion. And you heard me right. I said religion. And let me explain this to you so that there's no misunderstanding. You have a situation where you have, and I was just thinking about this the other day, you have someone coming out, say, of a Sam's Warehouse or a Costco. In the old days, I think even Walmart used to do it. And I remember some states that they're taker states, they're not giver states to the union. They're more religious states, backward, reactionary. And this is the reason why I'm saying this. By the way, I'm going somewhere, but they're very letter of the law. And, honestly, they're unpleasant because I think they're anti-religious. If you're a Pharisee, but I don't think righteousness lives in the letter of the law. If you're a Pharisee, it lives in the letter of the law. But we all know what their God, Jesus, said about the Pharisees. The way I read their holy books, I think that the law lies in mercy. I think it lies in equity. And once again, I say these things because these people who have insinuated themselves upon this great secular nation, we're going to be talking more about where that came from in this show, the modern state par excellence, the United States of America, have insinuated their religion into the political fabric. And when they do that, when they cross over that, what I think was Washington called the inseparable wall between religion and government, they become fair game, and they become subject to any attack that a journalist and a commentator like myself cares to make. And so here it is. And before I get into this more, we'll take a break, and we'll hear some of the folks at Twain Consulting. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake. And hello, this is Politics by Jake, and we are back and we are going on. And we're talking about the baneful influence of religion and Washington and the inseparable wall. And we just finished that up. And I wanted to go on here, and I was thinking about this with regard to this Costco situation and the other places like this and what they would do. And honestly, I don't know if they do it now, but I think that they do, is you had to hold your receipt out. I was just in a grocery store yesterday, and I put my receipt at the bottom of the bag. This is what made me think about this. And I looked at that, and I pondered for a moment, and I contemplated how, if this had been a Costco, I would have been required, like a slave holding a chit, to file past some person with a criminal justice degree who wasn't good enough to make a force, and I'm talking about a police force, venting his spleen or her spleen on a job like this, where he or she is basically checking things that are in other people's bags to make sure that nothing is stealing. And all I can say is, among other things, that I could say, what a waste of a 2-year or even a 4-year degree. This is just a shame that people like this are the people, these are the people who get sexually excited when they watch things like Roadhouse or other cop shows, because this is their longing. As I talked about the movie Stripes, where there was a person named Francis. They all called him Psycho because he was. And he was reduced in the end to the statement where he said, all I know is that I'm finally going to get to kill someone. And it was because of this, what's portrayed in the police shows, he gets to carry a gun. Stripes was about being in the military. He gets to legally carry a gun, and this is what the carry laws that are continually being attempted to be implemented in the states so that you can openly carry a weapon. You see these people going into, say, like Dunkin' Donuts or 7-Eleven or Panera or something like that in the states that allow open carry, and they're just like literally armed to the teeth. That it's like a comic book. It's like a Naked Gun movie where it's like an airplane filled with humorous absurdities. But these things are not absurdities. These things are happening. Just like these things that these supposedly religious, evangelically Christian / patriot type do in the name of their religion. And as I say, it crosses into the secular. And if it does that, that's where I'm standing. And it's therefore fair game. And I call it what it is, and it's an abomination. And I thought about the situation, getting back to being in the grocery store, where, and you hear me talk about this, of course. You hear me talk about how a fascist cabal, I say this almost every show, and I say it and I repeat it because I want you to get the message. Fascism is not something like a refugee from a Big Lebowski movie, talked about by a burnt-out stoner who has sensibilities that are rooted and locked in the 60s and in the early 70s and can't get out of it. It's been around for 100 years. I make it since 1919. The Admiral Horthy government of Hungary, first fascist dictatorship, I believe, and it's a real thing. So we need, as Americans, not to put our heads in the sand and think that we are so arrogant and so prideful of our great nation and so thinking as unassailable, so above it all, that things are going to go on the way they always have. But I tell you, there is a clique out there of people who long to destroy the secular state. They long to do it. Talked about it before. Leonard Leo of the Heritage Foundation is one of these. There are too many of them. To the extent that they have been able to get themselves elected into government, they now infest it. And when they get in there, they immediately try to implement their agenda. You just have this ridiculous situation yesterday where the House voted to cut funding to National Public Radio, which is like what? 1 to 2% of their total budget. And why? Because it preaches the secular state, the modern state par excellence, because it preaches diversity. It is an ideological, or I should say an example of an ideological attack. And that's where those people live. And the sooner you understand it, and the sooner you learn about it, the better. The better you can use the sacred franchise of the vote, defend it against it, and vote the bums out. So you have these people. And they've gotten into government, and they're so absurd. They're like comic book figures. They're just unbelievable. Donald Trump is a comic book figure. You have a Supreme Court that is willing to twist all the laws, to break with the president for no good reason, all to give this figurehead of a president to violate the sacred covenant regarding separation of powers, which is that every power needs to have a check in order to give this man the powers of a dictator, in order to give him the powers of a king. And you've either got to think that these people are the dumbest smart people that you've ever met in your life, because I'm in the legal profession, or I was. I'm not in it anymore, but I used to be for many years. And in there are some of the absolute smartest, absolute sharpest, most mentally facile and brilliant people I've ever met. And yet they're either the dumbest smart people that you have ever seen in your life, because they have violated this clear precedent of the separation of powers. And they have leaned to the concept of the unitary executive, which is a thing that ultra-reactionaries like Alito, or not Alito, well, actually Alito is for that, but I was referring to Scalia, whose father was a member of the American Nazi Party, basically advocated. They all advocated this idea of the unitary executive. And the unitary executive is nothing more or less than the president is a king. And we know, as I said, that since the days of Scalia, that the extreme reactionaries, or fascists, if you will, on the Supreme Court were fascinated by the idea of the unitary executive theory, which is an abomination as far as constitutional government is concerned. In other words, it's total dictatorship. It's, as I said, it's total Byzantine Empire. It's deified dictatorship. And the question that came up, of course, was if all federal agencies, referring back to this period of time in the 80s when Scalia was on the court, if all federal agencies cannot be independent, none of them can be independent. They are all subjected to the whims of the president. This is what they said. Everything about the agencies, the so-called independent agencies, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Food and Drug Administration, on and on. The entire New Deal alphabet soup, if you want. Those are semi-independent agencies. They're not supposed to be immediately the object of the president's bidding, of his meddling. But what about the Federal Reserve from right after World War I? That's an abomination, too. We've talked about that on the show. I've said, and I say it now, we probably need to talk about that again. And the idea was, anyway, with regard with this, was Trump, he looks like he gave assurances to Wall Street and similar people, as well he might, saying, I'm not going to take the unitary executive theory to the extreme of saying I get to dictate to the Federal Reserve, except that now he's doing it. And he's been doing it for months. He wants Powell, for example, fired. And of course, in the middle of this, we have this comic relief where he says, I can't imagine how anybody appointed him. Well, of course, Trump himself appointed Powell. And he appointed him in his first term. Biden then, attempting to reassure the markets, what have you, gave him a second term. And now that term is going to end in about a year. So the process of looking for a replacement for Powell, is on. And it might be someone like, what's that guy's name, Moore? One of the outspoken free market blabbers of Fox News. The kind, the people who play economics commentators on Fox News and have advised Trump in the past. So the unitary, and this is what I mean, the unitary executive theory, the idea of the president as the dictator, the idea of the president as a king, it's going to be taken all the way. Now, having said that, the problem here is that Wall Street regards the Federal Reserve System as their own personal private property. They don't want to share that with Trump. Trump wants to muscle in on their act. They know he's a con man. They know he's a grifter. They know he's out for the dollar. And that's when Trump may find out who the real owners of this country actually are. Because that's a secret combination. People don't even know about it. They think that it's federal. It's neither private system that this country uses that they call federal, but it's not. The Secretary of the Treasury sits on the cabinet, and she is the president of the Federal Reserve. And these things are known. These are not stupid people, but you have to think, and this is why I say it's ideological. These people are the dumbest, smart people that you've ever met. As I said, I'm in the legal profession, or was in the legal profession. They're ideologically motivated, which is what I've said. People like Alito, people like Roberts, who was a $5 million a year corporate lawyer before he ever became the Chief Justice. Not an Associate Justice, mind you, but a Chief Justice. Amy Coney Barrett. She's with an ad hoc religious group called the People of Praise. Extremely dangerous. Elizabeth Kagan, who thinks that we're all originalists. This is stunning. It's just stunning in its brazenness and in its willingness, for the sake of power, to trample on the sacred cows of the Constitution, which everybody knows. Originalism, it's kissing cousin textualism, they're all abominations. They are all the illegitimate children of the illegitimate father called legal positivism. And they're all violative of the Constitution. And if you come here to Politics by Jake, welcome. We love to have you on the show. We love to have you listening to the show. Thank you very much. This is why you come here, because I will explain things like this to you and educate yourself further. And with that, let's take a break. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/Politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back again. And I've told you now for like 2 or 3 shows now that I was going to explain an offhand comment that I made about Cardinal Richelieu, and I made it out of context. And I made it because I was moving through topics quickly. I didn't really have the time to explain it, but I want to explain it to you now. And I want to explain to you who Cardinal Richelieu was, why he was so important in the development of the idea of the secular state. See, this all goes back to the Renaissance. It all goes back to the Age of Enlightenment. It all goes back to the Age of Reason. These are all ideas, ages of development, that led to the establishment of the United States. And it's important to understand the influences, because if you do, then you can understand why I say that the United States is the modern state par excellence, because it is built on all of these things with these great thinkers and these great actors. And Richelieu was one of them. So let me go ahead and explain to you about Cardinal Richelieu. Cardinal Richelieu was significant in the government of France because he fundamentally reshaped the nature of political power in the early modern state. Even though he was a Catholic cardinal, his policies laid the groundwork for a secularized, centralized French state. And this was long before the French Revolution of 1789-1790, which formally secularized it under the First Republic. And here's why Richelieu mattered and how religion played into it. He strengthened the power over religious unity. Richelieu served as chief minister to Louis XIII. This is 1624 to 1642. He prioritized the strength of the monarchy over the power of the nobility or church factions, even though he was a cardinal himself. Richelieu did not prioritize religious purity. Instead, he prioritized political stability and national unity. He weakened the Huguenots, and the Huguenots were a group of French Protestants. He weakened them politically, not because of their religion per se, but because they held independent fortified towns, military forces, and he saw this as a threat to the crown. In 1628 siege of La Rochelle, this ended Protestant military autonomy, but it preserved religious tolerance under the Edict of Nantes. He used religion as a tool, but not as the goal. Richelieu exemplified raison d'etat, the idea that the state's needs override moral or religious concerns. He even allied Catholic France with Protestant powers, like Sweden and Dutch Republic, during the 30 Years' War to counter the Catholic Habsburgs, showing that his religious office did not dictate his policy. This move shocked many Europeans, but confirmed that Richelieu placed France's power above religious loyalty. He created foundations for the secular state by suppressing the nobility's power, which was often, by the way, tied to local church authority and feudal traditions. Richelieu centralized authority in the monarchy. His reforms in bureaucracy, military, taxation began separating state competence from clerical authority. While France remained officially Catholic, Richelieu's government subtly shifted authority away from the religious legitimacy towards statecraft, towards a national interest. His name was Armand Jean Duplessis. He was better known as Richelieu. If you've heard the name, it's probably from the Three Musketeers, where he's the scheming villain. But in real life, he wasn't a villain. He was worse than a villain. He was a strategist. So in the early 1600s, France was a patchwork quilt of rival powers: Protestants in the south, feuding nobles in the provinces, a Catholic church that acted more like a state within a state, and the king was Louis XIII, and he was a weak monarch. He was easily manipulated. It was soft power at best. But in 1624, Richelieu becomes his chief minister. This changes everything. Richelieu's mission was singular. It was to create a centralized, absolute monarchy. France wasn't going to survive if it stayed a loose alliance of warlords, bishops, and duchies. And to do that, Richelieu had to break three powers. First, the nobles. Second, the Protestants. And third, the church. Yes, the church. The one he served in name. The one he dismantled in practice. So first, the Protestants, the Huguenots. These were French Protestants with their own cities, their own militias, and treaties going back to the Edict of Nantes. They were armed, they were organized, and they were autonomous. Richelieu knew something the modern world keeps forgetting. You don't get to have a private army inside a sovereign nation and call that peace. So in 1627, he lays siege to La Rochelle, which was France's Protestant stronghold. 15 months of starvation, blockades, brutality. He crushed them. Not for their beliefs, not for their religious beliefs, but for their power. He let them keep their religion. He just took away their weapons, their walls, and their political independence. Does this sound familiar to you? This is the original playbook. Tolerate belief. No law respecting religion or the free exercise thereof. Tolerate belief. Dismantle resistance. Now, here's where it gets Machiavellian. And Richelieu, a cardinal in good standing, undermines the very institution he represents. And why? Because the Catholic Church in France didn't just preach, it owned land. It collected taxes. It answered to Rome. And Richelieu's France wasn't going to be run from Italy. So he starts tightening the leash. Clergy have to register royal edicts. Church land becomes taxable. Foreign influence cuts it off at the knees. And the French crown, not the Vatican, becomes the supreme authority. It's not full secularism yet, but the fuse is lit. And it's a slow burn to 1790, when the revolution finally severs the cord. When you look at collapse protocol and ask, how did we get to a world where institutions cannibalize each other just to survive? Remember Richelieu. He was the prototype. The biggest proof that Richelieu cared more about power than piety is the 30 Years' War. This was a massive religious conflict that was tearing Europe apart. Catholics versus Protestants. So you'd expect Richelieu, a cardinal, to side with Rome, right? No. He funds the Protestants. Why? Because France's real enemy wasn't Lutheranism. It was the Habsburg Empire. Spain, Austria, two Catholic powers that surrounded France like a vice. This wasn't about faith. It was about geopolitics. Richelieu's most famous doctrine, raison d'etat, the reason of state. What it means is this: the survival of the state justifies actions that would be immoral or illegal in any other context. That is where national interest trumps ideology, you'll pardon the expression, where cold strategy beats warm conviction. And it changed Europe forever. So what's Richelieu's legacy? He centralized France, He made the monarchy supreme. He subordinated religion to the state. He laid the foundation for what we now call secular governance, not by preaching it, but by practicing it ruthlessly, tactically, and without apology. And when the French Revolution came and the First Republic seized church lands, banned clerical power, they weren't starting from scratch. What they were doing is they were finishing what Richelieu began. He was the cardinal who made religion safe for the state by making the state too strong to challenge. So the next time you hear a leader quote scripture while demanding loyalty to the state, ask yourself, is this about faith or is it about control? Because history tells us loud and clear that religion doesn't lose power when it partners with the state. It loses power when it becomes a tool of the state. Cardinal Richelieu knew this, and the revolution proved it. And we're still living in happy consequences, although for how much longer, because of the baneful influence of religion and government that is creeping into government, which this cabal, and let's not kid ourselves, okay? This is not about political altruism. It's about a hatred of the secular state that has kept them, these religionists, out of power, and they don't know anything about Richelieu. They don't know anything about nothing. Out of power for hundreds of years, and the desire to get that power back never fades, never goes away. It is an example of the long game. The Catholic Church, for example, was there when power was lost, and they are here also now. And they haven't forgotten. Don't ever imagine it. And that goes for the other religionists too. It's about power. Pure and simple. It's about compulsion. It's about dominion. It's about enforcing your moral will on others. And there is no clear compass. Heresies abound to the point where one compass is as good as another. And this is Politics by Jake. And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And before we begin this segment, I want to remind you of something fundamental to Politics by Jake. We don't shy away from it. You know, we're not out there talking about it all the time, but it's a basic premise. It's a fundamental premise that we live by, that we believe in, that we're not fanatical about, but it's elemental, is more what I would say. And that is that we believe in the existence of what some would call secret combinations. I always make the distinction between a secret combination and a conspiracy. Conspiracies are not favored in law. And you don't want to have them because they're will-o'-the-wisp. They float around out there. They are difficult of proving. They're just problematic. But secret combinations, not as a fantasy, not as a paranoia, but as operating realities, yeah. I talk about them openly. I think they're the most obvious thing in the world if you're willing to see them. They're not just in history books, they're in headlines. And yes, global intelligence agencies like the CIA, the FSB, the Mossad, the NSA, these are real-world KGB. These are real-world examples of how power can be quietly coordinated behind the scenes to control outcomes, to suppress truth, and protect their own. That doesn't compromise our journalistic integrity. In my opinion, it reinforces it because we refuse to play dumb when the evidence stares us in the face. So, we believe in secret combinations. Those shadowy networks of influence and coercion that operate beyond elections, beyond accountability, and often beyond the comprehension of the public. We believe they are not some fringe theory. We believe that they are the most obvious thing in the world once you start paying attention. And these combinations don't need to wear name tags. You'll find them embedded in the structures of global finance, in intelligence agencies, in blackmail operations, and in the compromise of powerful individuals. And one of the most disturbing and revealing examples of a chicken that has come home to roost and is causing great problems for the benighted Trump administration? Jeffrey Epstein. And now let's talk about the firing of Maurene Comey. Maurene Comey isn't just any prosecutor. She's the daughter of James Comey, the former FBI director who stood at the crossroads of American power during the 2016 election and paid for it. But Maurene didn't inherit a name and rest on it. She built something of her own. She became one of the few prosecutors willing to touch the radioactive case of Jeffrey Epstein, even after his so-called suicide. You'll pardon the expression. She was in the courtroom. She knew the files. She saw what few are ever allowed to see. And now she's been fired. Let's ask the real question, shall we? Why would the Department of Justice purge one of the only people left with firsthand knowledge of what Epstein was doing and who was protecting him? And let's get uncomfortable, shall we? Jeffrey Epstein's network wasn't just a sleazy billionaire with a private island. That's the cover story. What it really was a compromise operation. It was a honey trap. It was an influence network. It was a front. And if you listen closely enough, even mainstream voices have started to ask the forbidden question. Was Epstein working for intelligence agencies? And if so, which ones were they? And the answer, it's not neat. It's not just Mossad. It's not just the CIA. It's the interwoven structure of elite control that transcends flags. Now, if you wanted, let's talk about this, okay? If you wanted to control politicians, judges, executives, scientists, what would you do? You'd get leverage. You'd get video. You'd create blackmail so toxic that they would never speak out, that they would never step out of line, and that they would obey without question. And Maurene Comey, she just got too close to that truth. She had access, she had credibility, and she had a name. And that, friends, is lethal to the people who operate in shadows. Now, let's talk facts, okay? Maurene Comey was the lead prosecutor in the Epstein case. Not the sanitized PR trial, but the real one. The posthumous pieces, the tentacles, the web. She would have had access to evidence that could take down some of the most powerful individuals on earth, not just politically, but systemically. That includes finance moguls, intelligence veterans, heads of state, corporate titans, and many of them still walking free, still dictating terms to the rest of us. And the same networks that silenced Epstein, that buried the blackmail files, that redirected the news cycle to 1,000 other distractions, those are the ones that just cut Maurene Comey loose. Let's call it what it is, shall we? This is not justice. This is not procedure. This is a purge. This is a shot across the bow of anyone who dares investigate the real power behind the throne. The firing of Maurene Comey is part of a strategy. It's part of a pattern, a broader war on those who try to clean house, to expose the rot, to speak forbidden truths, from whistleblowers to prosecutors to the rare journalist who digs one layer too deep. They are silenced, they are discredited, or they're made to disappear. And if you think this is hyperbole, then you haven't been paying attention. Let me end with this. If Maurene Comey were just some low-level screw-up, we wouldn't be talking about her. But that's not what she was. She was trusted, she was competent, and she was dangerous because she had nothing left to prove, and she had no reason to stay quiet. She's not the first. She won't be the last. This is what Politics by Jake is here for, to remind you that the war on justice is real, that secret combinations are just in the past. They're not just in the past, they are in the present, and they are terrified of the one thing they can't control, the truth. And this is Politics by Jake. Okay, this is Politics by Jake, and in the time that's left on the show, I wanted to point out something that I briefly mentioned in an earlier segment about Trump muscling in on the Fed. I wanted to talk about that. We've got a very serious situation. I can't tell you how serious it is. This is really, really bad. And I'm going to try to explain it in the time that I have left. As we know, the U.S. dollar has been, well, you may not know, but I'm telling you, okay? The U.S. dollar has been weak all year. In other words, the Trump administration coincides with a phase of weakness of the dollar. The dollar index is down for 2025. In other words, the dollar compared to a basket of similar currencies or other currencies is down. So you would begin to get a decline in the dollar. You would get a flight of liquidity out of the dollar. Into what? Into the Swiss franc, into quite possibly the euro, maybe the Japanese yen, and some others. A lot of liquidity, a giant sucking sound. Liquidity begins to leave the United States. And remember how I've talked to you about what happened in the 1929 crash, which actually became a deep depression in 1931. Remember how I've talked about that? I'm going to talk about that again. Foreign cash takes flight. The stock market begins to crash. And before too long, as we saw in the month of May, not so merry, because there was a stock market decline in the midst of a dollar decline. Now, they're not explaining this to you on the news, but that's why you go to Politics by Jake. This leads to a crisis in the Treasury bond market. This is really serious, and I'm going to explain to you how serious it is. I say bond, it means bills, it means notes, and it also means bonds, of course. And these range from 1 month, 30 days, to 30 years. That whole array in different degrees. A bond market panic would then endanger, it is the only way to finance world trade. Remember how I said to you, well, those of you who listen, I talked about how things used to be financed with based on the pound sterling and based on a letter of credit based on the pound sterling, and that was destroyed. And remember, I said to you about the person who said the world as we know it has ended, the world has ended, and it had. This is the same idea. We're in a situation where this is how world trade is financed. And these BRICS, of course, they're all a joke. They're a joke. Medvedev and his little coin, remember that? He said, I have a coin. He said, let's make this the reserve currency of the world. This is a joke. Once again, you've got to have a treasury bond market which routinely does 1 to 2 trillion a day, and which can, without batting an eye, escalate that up to 4, 5, maybe even 7 trillion in the kind of a crisis. And the idea is this is the idea. Anybody can park their money there. They can earn a decent return and be able to turn that into cash dollars at the drop of a hat. Governments do this. Like I said, this is the basis for world trade. The United States dollar is a reserve currency. Nobody else has this. The European Union? No, they don't have it. Japan? No. Russia? Russia? Forget it. And nobody in the BRICS. It's just all talk. The BRICS, great photo opportunity, not much more. So we don't want this to happen. Of course, that would mean then that the reserve currency role of the dollar would be over. And all of the BRICS, the great global south, these postures, they say, oh, let's get rid of the dollar. Well, this is nonsense. What are you going to replace it with? Don't you think it's better for the sake of the world to have a reserve currency? Because nobody else can do this. Nobody else even comes close. You probably ought to keep the dollar as a reserve currency unless you've got something better ready to go. And believe me, you don't. So that's why at the moment, you'd have to say a Trump puppet ideologue, a stooge of Trump, filled to the gills with this MAGA crap doctrine, which I guess means that central banks are bad, and they can be bad. I want to see a national bank. You've heard me talk about that, not a central bank. So central banks, are bad, can be bad, but there are things that are worse. And when the MAGA people talk, they don't talk about the distinction between a central bank and a national bank. They just, argue against central banks. But there are things that are worse, and what would be worse would be a Trump stooge replacing Powell. That would be worse. Because it would be accompanied by a loss of confidence worldwide in the U.S. dollar, in the United States government, in the U.S. stock market, in the U.S. Treasury securities. When they say $37 trillion, that's Treasury bonds that they're talking about. When they talk about the trust fund of Social Security, those are Treasury bonds. Medicaid, Medicare, these are trust funds. Not as big, but I think there still is one. Those are also Treasury bonds. So you don't want to see any of that happen. So let's see. One or two of the less offensive economists point out that Turkey is a recent example of a country where a doctrinaire dictator wanted to violate. He wanted to go against economic orthodoxy. And I think it's fine to go against economic orthodoxy, but you've got to pick the points where you diverge, right? And it's not all points. If orthodox economics says the sun will come up tomorrow, that's not where you want to start. You'll remember the economists wanted to keep the interest rates high to fight inflation. And I think that they were maybe up to 20% of inflation. The economists said the only way now is to give the bounds of the art ways out of it. And we can talk about those. But they said you can't lower the rates. You've got to increase the rates. And Erdogan said no. He's the prime minister, whatever, of Turkey. $31 million palace that he had built for himself. He said, no, I want to be popular. I'm going to have easy money. So their inflation went up to 80%. 80%. The Turkish pound, the Turkish lira, sometimes called, is still a basket case, although it has gotten better. So that's the leading example of somebody who thought he could lower interest rates in the face of inflation. And of course, we've got inflation coming back now. The interesting thing is that Powell said to Trump, I can't lower interest rates because of your crackpot tariffs, which are creating inflation. That would be a double whammy. It would be a double dose of inflation, and that would have some of these awful consequences, which I've been discussing. Now, crypto is up, and I'm running out of time here, but I want to give you these figures. Crypto is now $4 trillion. World crypto is $4 trillion. It's up 11% in 1 week recently. But it jumps around. It goes up and down 5 to 10% from week to week. Derivatives, in terms of their notional value, in other words, the value of the underlying asset, we have in this world $715 trillion of derivatives. This is a cancerous mass. This is a cancerous mass of speculative financial instruments. And these are demanding income streams, by the way. They want to be interest-bearing or have some income associated. And the question is, what are you going to do about that? Because once this blows, this is going to be a colossal earthquake. And that's all the time we have for the show. We leave you on a kind of a nightmarish note. $1,715 trillion of derivatives. And with that, I leave you to your week. I hope you have a pleasant week. If we're here on Friday, there will be another episode of Politics by Jake. Have a pleasant week. Bye-bye now. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, I'm Jake with Twain Consulting. If you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, you know how important solid agreements are to protect your hard work. Get It in Writing offers professionally drafted legal forms designed to save you time, money, and stress without the lawyer fees. Get full access for just $99. That's 80% off the regular price. Imagine the peace of mind you'll gain knowing your business is secure. Don't wait until problems arise. Call 213-465-0639 or visit facebook.com/Twain Consulting to get started today. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.